Okay, let me start the watch. I know you're going to tell me when I'm over the line. First of all, I have a new gizmo, a new app on my iPhone that allows me to track my dog when he breaks out of our fence. And or he's smarter than I am, so he doesn't have to break out of the fence. He's figured out how to open the gates. And we live in Northern California, and there's a big open space area above us, lots of open space where we live, including land that's been protected in perpetuity for agriculture, and through the great work of Ralph Grassi and other colleagues out there. And I thought when Jay first invited me here that maybe some kind of device like that might be useful for me to have on, just in case the talk went a little wrong. But I'm from Missouri. I was desperate to have been from Illinois. Spent my whole life wishing I'd been born and raised and gone to university here. So it's a thrill to finally at least be here part-time. And just to help allay the need for having that collar, let me just say a couple of things off the top. In response to the question I almost always received from farm audiences throughout the 1990s, let me just say, I eat meat. I also eat processed food, and I also eat conventional produce. And I recommend that people, when they're thinking about what they eat, that they should consider mostly eating what's healthy for them. And all three of those categories are included. I've spent most of my professional life in agriculture policy. We do a lot of other things at Environmental Working Group. I've spent most of my professional life in farm policy, trying to get money for farmers so they could conserve their land. Money for farmers. And there are dozens of environmental organizations who have been doing the same thing. And in all the panels and all the conversations we heard this morning, there was just glancing reference to the fact that there are very strong centers of support for agriculture within the environmental movement. And as a result of my work, and that sounds immodest, but it wasn't me alone, my work and a lot of other people's work overcoming the resistance of the agriculture community, in most cases for the Conservation Reserve Program, the early phases of the Water Quality Incentives Program, which became EQIP, the Wetlands Reserve Program, and many others, tens of billions of dollars have flowed into agriculture to help farmers deal with their environmental challenges. Tens of billions of dollars, including billions of dollars that had to be spent because of dumb technology application and even dumber federal policies that drove farmers to overuse and overextend the capacity of their land. So let me suggest to you, and I want to talk about three main themes going forward from that introduction. Let me suggest to you that if you feel defensive in agriculture now, that you're under attack, if you feel that your story is not getting out, and you listen to almost all the advice that you heard earlier today, that advice is bad. The best piece of advice that several people mentioned, the most valuable piece of advice, is to put farmers out there and get them talking to people. Not people who represent agribusiness. I know that term was invented by other people, and now the people who invented it seem to not want to use it. It seems somehow a subject of a matter of shame, sometimes like pesticides. We need to hear and connect to farmers, is point one. And I strongly agree with that. It's one thing, though, for all the companies who've come up here and said that, to think that farmers should be the spokespeople. It's another thing altogether for those companies to hide behind those farmers and they're hiding behind farmers in many cases. My view is that one reason we're not making progress in finding more common ground is that there's more common ground between farmers and environmentalists than there is between farmers and some of the industries around them that are vital and essential to their business and that they have relationships with, but have fundamentally different interests at the end of the day in many cases than many farmers do. And I'll talk about that just briefly. It's also one thing to be proud of technical accomplishments, and I went to ag school. My master's is in soil science. And I have to tell you, if you wanted to invite somebody who was not in awe of what agriculture and farmers have accomplished, you got the wrong guy up here, because I am in awe. But it's a different thing to be in awe of that technological accomplishment than to assume that everything about the technology has worked the way we thought it would and that it hasn't had environmental impacts. Not one speaker up here even acknowledged that there was anything really much other than myth or emotion or misinformation or disinformation at the root of any criticism of production, agriculture, food processing, or our food system. Not one. So if you want to continue, as someone said, if you want to define insanity, and if you think the position you find yourselves in as agricultural communicators feels insane to you, then just keep doing what you've been doing. And I think what we've been doing is, what I've witnessed, is people adopting the definition of listening that Fran Lebowitz, the sarcastically applied, the New York writer, she said, the opposite of talking is not listening. The opposite of talking is waiting. And you're waiting to talk. You're not really listening, in my view, if you follow this advice. Now, here's what I think is at the root of it. There are technologies in agriculture that have had profound beneficial impacts on food production, soil erosion control, water quality protection, wildlife habitat, and so forth. But for each of those positive outcomes, we can show you instances where those technologies have been over-applied, misapplied, and are actually contributing to problems in each of those areas. And in very rare instances do the companies that make those products acknowledge them until they're too late. 2, you would think, to hear some of what I hear from companies, you would think that they have volunteered to make generations of safer pesticides and volunteered to come up with safer applications of some of the products that are used in animal agriculture. And again, I eat meat, including conventional meat. But the fact of the matter is there have been tremendous battles, and that the result of that has been, in some cases, that the more dangerous products, the riskier products, have been taken off the market against the wishes of the companies that produce them. So even though I think we can all assume that we want to feed the world, even though I think we can all assume that the starting point is to treat the environment, treat farm animals humanely, one reason factory farms has caught on as a phrase, and one reason no one has been able to figure out a way to kind of sell that image in a better way, is because people have seen images of factory farms. And as someone who grew up around cattle as a kid, cow-calf operation that my uncles had, 2 of them in southern Missouri, I can tell you that image that I have in my brain of how we handled animals and how they're handled in some of these very large confinement facilities, if you think you can sell that, good luck. Animals are treated inhumanely, and not just by bad actors. They're often treated inhumanely by a lot of people, by a lot of big operations, just because it's a matter of doing business that way. And they are forced into do that by a lot of economic circumstances, but that's not to say that we couldn't do better. I'm not proposing that organic can feed the world, but I would also urge you to look at feeding the world in a more nuanced way. A Nobel Prize was awarded in the late 1990s to an Indian economist who was able to demonstrate that what happened in famines was not a shortage of food. What happened in famines was the inability of people to buy it. Hoarding took place. People, particularly in rural areas who didn't have income to be able to buy the food that was right next to them, but under guard and being hoarded, they starved. Not to diminish the importance of increasing food production, but it's a very nuanced conversation than suggesting what we basically need is just more biotechnology and just more improved seed variety, and not focus on waste in the field, not focus on the ability to diversify agricultural production systems that are local and always probably will be local. A very nuanced conversation. This to me seems like waiting, not listening, to make the argument that way. And then I'll finally close. Am I out of time? Am I way over time?
No, you got a minute and a half.
A minute and a half. With the iPhone example. Did everyone think that was a great example, the iPhone example? You're wondering if you should raise your hand now, aren't you? Here's why it was a spectacularly bad example, coming from our good friend at Monsanto. And I have had a lot of friends, including Mike Taylor at Monsanto over the years. Here's why it was a spectacularly bad example. First of all, who wants to go in line to someone at an iPhone store and say, hey, thank farmers? So just at the sales level, not so good. But remember what happened to the immediate predecessor of the current iPhone, which I have in my pocket right here and tracks my dog? Remember what happened? Bad antenna. Bad antenna. And you know what Monsanto, you know what Steve Jobs did at first and Apple did at first? They stonewalled. They didn't disclose. They didn't talk about it openly. They weren't straight with their customers. They started telling their customers, you're holding the phone wrong. Right? To me, that's what I hear a lot from the agribusiness sector. You're holding the phone wrong. It's perfectly fine. You're silly to be concerned about it. Well, what happened? They got a low rating from Consumer Reports. The sales started to really dam up and stop. And there was so much pressure that finally Steve Jobs, in his characteristically brilliant fashion after that stumble, sent an email out acknowledging that there were some problems. There were some problems. That is listening. That is listening. And what did they do? First, they gave a case that would solve the antenna problem for everyone who complained about it, free. And then they reinvented the iPhone antenna. What we don't hear enough from where I come from, and if you feel like you're losing the war, as someone said, and you're in this defensive corner, this multi-billion-dollar industry, where I come from, I hear that kind of response an awful lot from agriculture. And to be honest, I'm worried we're going to be hearing it a lot more, because another topic no one in this media discussion yet has mentioned is the implosion of the media. The loss of reporting, independent reporting, the loss of the ability to gather news. Now, maybe you think they always gather it wrong or put my quotes at the top and someone else's at the bottom. That may be a fair criticism, and you're entitled to it. But to not have reporters out there looking simply means we're going to have fewer people lifting up those rocks and asking the tough questions of my side and every other side in this debate. It's a huge threat to our democracy, and it ought to be topic A for anyone who's concerned about achieving, from the first rough draft of history, as my friend Bradley likes to call news, achieving over the long term a better understanding and a more fact-based discussion. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to be on the menu. And I want to thank my friend Jay Vroom for making it possible for me to come here to send that invitation along. And thank you very much for your time. Look forward to the discussion.